Okay. So you do the prayers you want to do, John. You've got special prayers you do, so you do them.
To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hidam Guru Rana Mandala Kamniyatayami.
So just we've taken refuge. So let's just these last two lines, just say these in English. So we're reminding ourselves we've taken refuge, and then here we generate this marvelous, as Lama Zopa says, generate this marvelous attitude, this motivation, this purpose for listening to these teachings, which is that we want to, no matter how long it takes, sow the seeds in our mind so we can develop our amazing potential for Buddhahood, so that we can be of benefit to others. So thinking this way, I think, just said in English a couple of times. So, I go for some enlightened the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. By the merits I create by listening to the teachings, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. That's it. Thank you so much. So we're discussing compassion, okay, which is the more advanced level, actually, of the Lam Rim, as we know. And I think we discussed where we go. You're going to move the prayer. I want to see the people. There we go. So the point I was really trying to make last week is actually how compassion is in fact more advanced, which is surprising to us, because first of all, we don't think of spiritual teachings in a sort of orderly way. We don't think you do, the stuff that's easier, then you get more advanced. Or if we do think of advanced, we think of Tantra, for example, But bodhicitta, actually is really pretty outrageous. Not to mention just compassion for all suffering beings. It's really quite shocking. But like I was really trying to point out last week, and this is a crucial point, that the first stages of practice, the so-called wisdom wing, or the nuts and bolts of Lord Buddha's teachings about karma and the mind, are the absolute prerequisite. I like to use the analogy of junior school, high school, university. Well, it's obvious you want to go to university, to college, you've got to go to junior school and high school. And that's the point here. Absolutely. So like we discussed last week, if we don't understand karma for ourselves, if we don't understand why we are suffering, first point, and we don't understand the subtler levels of suffering, there's the suffering of suffering and the suffering of change and this all-pervasive suffering, the levels that Buddha would talk about. And if we don't realize for ourselves these things and get what they call renunciation, and really the simplest way to put that is what we would say in the West is self-compassion, In just, in other words, in the same way that when you go to the doctor and she says, don't smoke, otherwise you're going to get cancer, it's self-compassion that causes you to want to give up smoking. It's quite hard. You'd like smoking. It's self-compassion that causes you to give up sugar because you don't want diabetes. It's not an easy job. You love your sugar. So it's self-compassion. It's not hard. It's hard work. So self-compassion, in the way we use that term in the West, the Buddhists don't use that. That's really what they call renunciation, which means you've got to know what suffering is, your suffering, and be fed up with it. And therefore want to discover the causes, which is your own past karma and your delusions, and give those up. And it's really hard work. This is the absolute basis for being able to develop compassion for others. Because like we said last week, do the analysis. The word compassion, it's referring to an attitude in the mind such that when you see people suffer, even the simplest level of suffering, if a bad thing happens, your heart reaches out to them. You have empathy. Now, that's fine. That's easy. Like I said last week, that's easy when the bad things happen. The poor people, like just now, this terrible suffering of the Syrians and the Turks, with their earthquake, the people in the war zones, immediately our heart reaches out. But like in a war, if you side with one group, you don't have compassion for the other. But this is the point here. Once we understand karma for ourselves, why I am suffering is because of my own past actions, then we will understand why someone out there is suffering because of their own past actions. And then we will have even more compassion. This is the whole point. Bodhisattvas would have more compassion for the harmers because the victim is just finishing their karma by experiencing that suffering, but the harmer is just beginning countless future lifetimes of suffering. That's the level of compassion that we're trying to cultivate, and you can't get that until you understand karma. It's very simple, it's very straightforward, because that's the basis of it. So that's what we discussed last week. So then, of course, now we're going to, and this is what I want to do now today and next week, is go into the details about how to develop these outrageous levels of compassion within the explicit teachings on it. This other one is background. So let's just look at, did I give you course notes? Were there course notes there, Mary or John? Did I not give you course notes? I didn't. That's very wicked. Well, I'll just have to do that. I'll send you some after this tonight or tomorrow, then you'll have them ready for next week. So we'll go through this classic text called the 8 verses. I mean, usually Tibetan texts are so poetic, but this is the most boring title you could ever hear, isn't it? The 8 verses. I mean, you can't get something more boring than that. But it's the most intense teachings, the most outrageous teachings. And of course, it's what it is, really quite advanced teachings for the ones who are really aspiring for this great compassion and eventually bodhicitta. It's the whole approach. And this is the extreme level of developing compassion, is the ability to use the suffering experiences of our life as grist for our mill to really grow our compassion hugely. There's a very specific logic to it, and it takes us a while to understand it. I mean, we talk about emptiness being difficult. I think emptiness is easier than getting this kind of levels of compassion and bodhicitta. They're really quite outrageous. And the instructions are quite specific, So the 8 verses, I wonder if you have a copy there, Mary or someone, you can share it on the screen. It'd be really good to go, or I want to see all the people. We'll just mention, well, actually, I know the verses, but I want to have them there for people to have a look at, but just keep them small on the side of the screen because I want to see all the faces of people. See if you can find the 8 verses, a version of it. But can you put it on sort of small? Oh, I see. Okay. So can you make it really skinny, Mary, so I don't take up the whole screen? Can you do it like a half a page at a time or something? No. Might be difficult to do that. It's too difficult. It'll be too small, Mary. Take it off. Don't put it there. It's okay. It'll be too difficult. Take it off. Yeah. So I'll just go through the verses in an easygoing way, and then I'll send you this course notes, and it'll be in the course notes. But we're probably all to some degree familiar with these verses. So we need background to these verses when we read them. So the very first one. Actually, no, I don't think I'm going to do that yet. We'll do that next week. Okay. But this week, what I'll do is talk about this different series of techniques that actually culminate in the development of bodhicitta, starting with equanimity. So we'll do the 8 verses as more advanced level. So we'll do that next week. So there's these techniques, these different 2 main in the text we know from our lamas, and traveling going right back to the Nalanda tradition. There are 2 main little texts that are used by all the lamas to cultivate this love and compassion. So, remember we talked again last week, but this is the background. In Buddhist view of the mind, we've got all the neurotic, deluded, ridiculous states of mind, and then we have the positive states of mind. There's 2 distinct categories. We don't tend to think that way in modern psychology, but this is quite specific to the Buddha. So you've got the I-based, fear-based, neurotic, delusional, afflicted, very depressing and unhappy states of mind: attachment, anger, jealousy, despair, low self-esteem, you name them, we all know them. Then you've got the virtuous states of mind, very specific: love, compassion, kindness. And each of these is defined quite precisely. They're quite precisely defined. So you could argue that, one way we could say is all in the wisdom wing, where we start to abide by the laws of karma. First, we're just controlling our body and speech, no discussion of the mind. Then we go to the middle scope and we really start to work on our mind. And the main job there is to begin to identify and then to subdue the delusions. There's no discussion of becoming loving yet. That's a compassion wing teaching. This is specifically identifying the neurotic states of mind, seeing how they cause us pain, and attempting to subdue them. That's a full-time job, working on the delusions, like pulling out the weeds. Now in the compassion component, we're proactively developing the positive qualities. The methodology is the same. You continue to look at your mind. You continue to subdue your delusions, but now you're moving more towards wanting to develop. It's moving in the direction of proactively developing the virtuous states of mind, developing them, nourishing them, growing them. So all the virtuous states of mind, you could summarize them into 2, really. There's the attitude of love, and there's the attitude of compassion. All the others really can be subsumed into those, I feel. So love is defined very simply as they all start with being a thought, begin with a thought. It's, may you be happy. So if you see people being happy and you delight in their happiness, that's you loving somebody. That's the meaning of love. Already, this is quite a revelation. We mix love up with attachment, so we call it a whole bunch of different things. Attachment is I-based, self-centered, what I need. And we also happen to have love for those people, but it's all mixed up with it. But love is a virtuous state of mind that delights in the happiness of others. So compassion is an attitude that when you see suffering, your heart reaches out and you have empathy. Oh my God, look at that suffering. That's unbearable. That's love and compassion. And the point is, in these techniques, we're trying to grow these to an incredible degree. And they culminate in bodhicitta. So there's 2 main texts. There's one I think is called The 6 Causes and 1 Effect, and the other one's called Exchanging Self for Others, I think is called that. Something like that. So, and there's a particular one, a series of 11 techniques altogether that Pabonka Rinpoche, he combines the 2 texts, So the starting point, the very start, the foundation, the basic one. And again, these terms are used quite specifically. They're not just vague notions. They're quite specifically defined. And this very first technique, there's the absolute basis, the foundation upon which you grow the others, step by step by step. It's a very organic process, So this first one is called equanimity. I didn't discuss it last week, did I? I don't think I went there. No, I think that's what I said I'd discuss this week. Okay, this is the explicit techniques for how to develop love and compassion and bodhicitta. Last week, we're looking at the necessity to look at karma and delusions as a basis and understand the 4 Noble Truths for ourselves. So, okay, equanimity, there's different definitions of this word. In the first stages of practice, in the wisdom wing, you develop equanimity within your own mind as and well as and when you lessen delusions, control your body and speech, and start to live a nice, disciplined life. So you become more stable. Quite literally, you have more equanimity, not so extreme up and down like a yo-yo, not so much neurotic, crazy emotions. That's an equanimity that's really delicious. But that's not the equanimity here. Equanimity here is a different use of the word altogether. And what it's referring to is an attitude in our own mind in relation to other sentient beings. So basically, when we look at the Buddhist model of the mind, we're going to see there are three distinct characteristics, three distinct categories. The neurotic, deluded, ridiculous, negative, I-based ones, which we can get rid of, that cause us suffering. The positive, virtuous, marvelous ones, which you can develop to perfection, which cause us happiness. And the third lot, like I call the mechanics of the mind. So in relation to sentient beings, these three play out in a very specific way, and we know it well. So this equanimity is a stable state of mind you've developed when you've got it. What it is this heartfelt recognition that a friend, who is the object of your attachment, an enemy, who is the object of your aversion, the first two of the three poisons, and then the third category, as we all know, which is 99.999% of the universe, they are called strangers. So they're the object of one aspect of ignorance, that is indifference. So when we see, because of attachment, this emotional hunger within us to always get what I want. So in relation to others, when we have people we call our friend, we will have love for them. We will have compassion for them. The thing that drives it, though, is this attachment. That the person we are attached to is usually, hopefully, the person that always fulfills our attachments needs. And then that person is the one we will prepare to love and have compassion for. So our beloved, our poodle, our children, maybe our boyfriend, unless he's being mean to us today, but we have the objects of our attachment. So we call them friend. So of course, there's more than attachment. We also do have love and compassion. But as we can see, we only have love and compassion for them. We try to have love and compassion for ugly people and mean people, and it's very hard. But the ones that we spontaneously have love and compassion for are our beloveds, the families, close friends, our people, the objects of our attachment, as long as they fulfill my attachment's needs, which makes it sound very cruel, but analyze it. It's exactly like that, Then the next category, we don't use the word enemy, but it's a good word because it's the opposite to friend. It's a person for whom we do not have attachment. We might have once, but then they stop doing what our attachment wants because they left us for a younger version or something. And now they're in the enemy category. And what's the delusion we have in relation to them? It's called aversion. If it's really strong, it's called anger. But we basically, attachment, you go towards the person. They're all delicious and lovely, all la-di-da. And the aversion, you push them away. It's aversion. Aversion is the bare bones state of mind. And anger is the strong state of mind, a strong expression of aversion for those who very proactively do not do what my attachment wants. In fact, they've gone against my attachment's needs and have even harmed me. That's what we mean by enemy. That could be groups of people, a certain country. It could be anything, ex-boyfriend, you name it, animals. Now, the third category, this is where it's a bit shocking, is really the vast majority of the universe. And they're called strangers. So by definition, analyze it, a stranger is a person who neither harms me nor helps me. In other words, they don't even come into my life. The world is full of strangers. We read more about them these days with our iPads and our televisions and our computers. We're always, bumping into the world all over the place. But basically, we don't, some places, some countries, we don't even know where they are. We don't know we don't even know what the people look like. People that are called strangers. And you think about it, there's no fourth category. There are those we're attached to. There are those we have aversion for, and there were those we couldn't care less about. What does Americans say? Could care less about. Sounds very confusing to me. Could care less. We Australians say couldn't care less. It's very odd, isn't it? So that's it. There's no fourth category. Think about it. So in other words, there's the objects of attachment, aversion, and a particular aspect of ignorance, indifference. We get this, and it's the most normal way in the world to categorize the world. Everybody does it. The dogs, the ants, the monkeys, the worms. Everybody has their objects of attachment, aversion, and indifference. So it is normal. We all have it. But this approach here is saying, I mean, Buddha's telling us anyway we can get rid of the three poisons. We talk about the three poisons way back in the wisdom wing, where we see that, we look more into the trying to subdue the attachment and aversion, isn't it? But here we're looking at the sentient beings who are the objects of these three poisons. So, of course, as we lessen our attachment, and even in the wisdom wing, and lessen our aversion, we're going to get less and less attachment and aversion to other sentient beings as well. But here it's very specifically related to sentient beings. So this equanimity, what it is when you've got it, and it takes a lot of practice to really develop it, is this heartfelt, you'd say, this is my way of putting it, this heartfelt recognition that a friend, your beloved, an enemy, the ugly ex-husband, and the stranger, the potential new boyfriend you haven't met yet, who's boring to you right now, the friend, the enemy, and the stranger. This heartfelt recognition that the friend, the enemy, and the stranger are equal to each other from one point of view. Just one point of view. They equally yearn to be happy, and they equally do not want suffering. That's what this equanimity is. And what we have to do is prove that to be a truth. Now, intellectually, we know it's true, but we don't experience the truth because we're completely driven by attachment and aversion and indifference, because we're in samsara. So we need to use logic to argue with ego's misconceptions. And all these meditations on the 6-point training, this and that, these are all, when we think of meditation on compassion, we sort of think of it as all gooey and lovely and tears. No, these meditations are using logic to argue with ego's ridiculous misconceptions. You've got to use logic because ego's views are very entrenched. We believe their stories implicitly. So we have to really dig deep and use arguments to prove how attachment and aversion and ignorance in relation to sentient beings are completely misplaced. They have no basis in logic. And this one logic we're trying to prove here is that from their point of view, these three people, from their point of view, they are the same as each other in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. They're the same in terms of many other ways, but these are the two main points we're trying to prove. And why are we trying to prove this point? Because right now, we do have love for some people, the friends. And what's love? May you be happy. We love them. That's what love is. A person you want to be happy. You see them happy and it makes you happy. That's love. And we know we have some people for whom we have this, but we know they're the ones that we're attached to. I mean, if, with some, it's heartbreaking, so many parents, their children give them up. The parent still wants them to be happy, still doesn't want them to suffer, even though the child has rejected them. So we can see some people never give up love and compassion for that beloved child. But often what happens is, you've got your boyfriend, then he chucks you out and gives, and cheats on you. Then he goes from the friend category into the enemy, isn't it? So it's not very stable. And Sama Zopa says it's not very stable. So the logic of equanimity, trying to prove that everybody wants happiness and doesn't want suffering equally, is that that's the basis of love. Love is may you be happy. But if it's only a small group, I want to be happy. And the logic is wrong. The logic right now for why I want you to be happy is because you make me happy. The logic that ego uses for me saying, may you be happy, is it's kind of contingent upon you doing what my attachment wants. So it's kind of self-centered. It's a basically self-centered view. But what we're trying to shift that. So instead of me wanting the person who makes me happy to be happy, I want everyone to be happy. On what basis? Very simply, because they want it. That's the difference. So the love we're trying to cultivate here and the compassion we're trying to cultivate here is based on the logic that everybody wants it. Whereas now it's got strings attached, as we'd say. I'm prepared to make you happy. I'm prepared for you to be happy and even help you be happy as long as you make me happy. So it's self-centered. The basis is completely self-centered, but so natural, it seems quite shocking to argue with it, but this is what we're trying to do here. And compassion is the same principle. You have enormous compassion for your child, enormous compassion for your boyfriend. And it's genuine. You have really good compassion. But if there were no attachment there, you would not have it. And that's the point that's quite shocking. So there's many ways to argue with this. There's all sorts of arguments. So even as we're talking, you imagine in front of you, to the left, your beloved. If you have a beloved right now, a person you're really attached to, whom you adore. Right in front of you, eyeball to eyeball, a mean, ugly person. It can be a politician, it could be your ex-boyfriend, it could be a person at work, a person even you mildly have aversion for, who basically doesn't do what your attachment wants, who doesn't make you happy, who's mean, right in front of you, enemy. And then to the right, you can imagine a stranger, a person whose face you know just enough to put them there, but about whom you are really indifferent because they haven't touched your life in any way. We've all got these three. So there's so many arguments, logical arguments. And what we're trying to prove, like I said, is that these three people are equal to each other from this one point of view, just one. They each want to be happy and each don't want something. So we've got to try and prove that point. So what does that mean? Well, I think we know it's true. I mean, one really good, I love this argument I find really helpful. Let's say, you've got your enemy, friend, and stranger out there, but now visualize each of them looking at you. And for each of them, you are the friend, you are the enemy, and you are the stranger. Think like this. Think of these three people in front of you. And so you look at your friend in your mind, and you can see them looking at you with kind of starry-eyed. They adore you. They love you. We know, if we've got someone like that. So think about this friend, this is from your side, friend, but you are the friend for them. You're the category called friend, right? Think of this way. So they're looking at you and you can see how they look at you. They love you. They're smiling at you. Now, think about this. You are not thinking like, I am friend. You're just thinking, I'm me, And if anybody asks you right at this moment, your friend comes along, Mary comes along and says, Robina, you want to be happy? I'll say, of course I want to be happy. Do you want to not suffer? I'll say, of course I don't want to suffer. So I know that's a certainty, isn't it? I know I want to be happy and I don't want to suffer. It's something primordial. In fact, one way of framing all of Buddha's teachings is in terms of its being a path for how to stop suffering and get happiness. That's quite literal. So these aren't just this casual idea for, happy and suffering. It's quite precise for the Buddha. And the Buddha happens to be saying that he's got methods to help us get happy and stop suffering, but he's trying to point out that everybody wants it in the most primordial part of their bones. It's spontaneous. The ant, the monkey, the dog. The point here is you are the friend in this case, right? You're called friend. Now, you want to be happy and don't want to suffer. Now, look at your enemy, please. Look at the person who can't stand you. We all have people who don't like us. Look at that person in the eye. They don't like you. They maybe were married to you. They maybe you were their boss or whatever, and they just don't like. We all have got people who don't like us. In other words, for whom we are the so-called enemy. Now, look at them. They're not interested in you, are they? They don't care if you're happy or sad. They couldn't care less because you've been mean to them. But Mary comes along and now I'm the enemy now, aren't I? I was a friend before, but now I'm the enemy. And Mary says to me, Robina, you want to be happy? Yes. Do you want to suffer? No. Exactly the same as when I was labeled friend. There's no difference. There's not a fraction of difference. Now, the stranger, have a stranger looking at you. They're kind of bored by you because they don't know you that well. And they can't even be bothered to look at you. And it's just the same thing. Because I'm a stranger for one person, because I'm an enemy for another and a friend for another. What has that got to do with the price of fish? I want to be happy every second, and I don't want to suffer every second. It is logic. So put three different people in the friend, enemy, stranger categories, and it's the same thing. But the trouble with this is it's a minefield. Because let's say your next door neighbor, you've discovered he's a pedophile, and you put him in the enemy category, let's just say. And then you hear that you're trying to develop equanimity and recognize that this pedophile wants to be happy. We can't cope with that thought. That makes no sense to us. What are you talking about? What do you mean he wants to be happy? He doesn't deserve happiness, we will say. So it's a very loaded statement to simply say we're trying to recognize everybody wants to be happy. We don't know what to do with that. But so it's a very fundamental point we're trying to cultivate here, that we're trying to get first ourselves out of the equation, but we're also trying to not have any judgment here. The point here is to try and observe the most demented, evil person on the planet and the sweetest person on the planet. That's not the issue here. They're both driven by the wish to be happy and not suffer. It's a fundamental kind of primordial drive that we're trying to recognize. And in fact, as we know, the pedophile, due to their delusions, thinks jumping on little girls is the cause of happiness. So we can have eventually you have even more compassion for him because you realize he's so deluded. But that's what's going to come eventually. But the fundamental point is to try and observe this really seemingly simple idea that everybody is driven by the wish to be happy and not suffer. And this is the start in these stages of development, and it could be over lifetimes, that for us personally will culminate in our bodhicitta, where we have just enormous love and compassion for every single sentient being because they want to be happy, because they don't want suffering. And it's got zero to do with whether they make me happy or not, because you've gone way beyond attachment and aversion. So it's another method for getting beyond attachment and aversion, basically. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's quite specific. But our trouble is because we have this very loaded idea of deserve. It's very interesting. I find it most fascinating because the first thing you do, because, let's say your husband cheated on you and you are heartbroken. You definitely are heartbroken. We understand this. And then someone, says, well, he wants to be happy, Robina. You kind of want to burst into tears. It's like stabbing you. What do you mean he wants to be happy? Look what he did to me. Because so what we tend to mean by that is that somehow, the poor fellow can't help it, and you pat him on the head so he's allowed to get away with it. That's not the issue at all. It's got nothing to do with that. It's something very fundamental that we're trying to get ourselves out of the equation. And we're trying to recognize that everybody's in the same boat. The wackos, the murderers, the pedophiles, the victims, the harmers, you name it. All the friends, all the enemies, and all the strangers, which are three labels that we dump on people, that they have no fundamental basis in logic. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get beyond these labels that we put upon the world, which we use as the basis of whether or not we love them, which is incredibly self-centered. So we're trying to get beyond that. We're trying to see that every being wants happiness and doesn't want suffering. It's only that point, simply that point, nothing more. This is the basis. And then over the next 11 points, we gradually develop this love, compassion, great compassion, which culminates in bodhicitta. And it's the starting point. Because as long as we think it's only the friends who deserve my wish that they be happy because they do what I want, it's totally self-centered, and it won't last because that friend will give you up and go into the enemy category, And this is what Buddha's telling us. One of the logics to use is that life after life after life after life, we have been bumping into each other, and we've been friends, enemies, and strangers countless lifetimes. I mean, that doesn't necessarily move us very much, but we can certainly see in this life, everybody began as a stranger. Then they either became friends or enemies, or they became a friend first, then they became an enemy. We can see this, They're such unstable. As Lama Zopa says, the logic we use now, it's unstable. So equanimity is this recognition that they're all the same from this point of view, which becomes the basis of our wanting to develop love and compassion for them, which we start to develop in these different stages, these different points. And I think I began it last week. Didn't I begin it last week? I can't remember. So are there any questions so far? Certainly about equanimity. Any questions? This idea of equanimity, that everyone wants to be happy, no one wants to be suffering. In other words, get yourself out of the equation is a good point to say it. Any questions, darling? Yeah. Good, darling.
Well, it's very difficult to think of wanting a pedophile, for instance, to be happy. Especially if what makes the pedophile happy is to jump on little girls.
Yeah, that's the point I'm getting at. That's why it's so hard. So at this moment in time, though, we're not even wanting them to be happy, because that's called love. And that's about the 7th point up the ladder of the 11. So we're trying to recognize, and it's a good point you made. What we're trying to recognize here is, it's like a primordial drive in everybody. They're driven by the wish to be happy. That's all we're looking at here. We're not wanting them to be happy yet. That's called love. And that comes several steps on. So it's sort of a fun to try to get this really recognition that everybody wants to be happy. And then as we develop, we're going to start to realize that due to their own delusions from past life, they believe that jumping on little girls is what makes them happy. And as we are developing in love and compassion, that becomes the basis of our compassion for them, because they're so deluded. Okay, we'll put them in prison, but we'll realize, I mean, in other words, if it's your child, if you have a child who is an alcoholic, you can see that they believe becoming an alcoholic makes them happy, but you have all the more compassion for them, because you see how deluded they are and how they're actually causing themselves suffering. And that's the basis of your compassion. So in a sense, we're trying to grow that for everybody. And it doesn't mean eventually you don't put them in prison or protect them from themselves or whatever, but it's got to be a starting point. Not even yet, may he be happy. And that comes later. That's love. It's the recognition that what drives him is the simple wish to be happy and not suffer. It's something every scorpion, every monkey, every lion, every human, every pedophile, every saint. It's something primordial, the Buddha is pointing out. And it's the beginning of this getting ourselves out of the equation, because what we're trying to do is develop love and compassion for everybody, which means help them find the way to be happy and to help them against. So that, but it's a starting point. The recognition that we're all driven by this wish is really what equanimity is. But yes, exactly. As we then say, what do you mean the pedophile wants to be happy? He doesn't deserve it. That's our first instinct. Absolutely. That's our point. And that's why at the moment, if it's your beloved who wants to be happy, you are happy for them to be happy because they're making you happy. It's easy to know that. But when it's somebody who's harmful, so we have this thing of deserve. It's quite heavy. But the Buddha would say everybody, is suffering tremendously. And when we start to realize that, we will want to benefit all of them. But that comes, this is what we're going to. We're moving towards that. But this is one step at a time here. You get my point? This very first point. I mean, can you even recognize that? As deluded as the pedophile is, or as the lion eats you for breakfast because they believe eating you for breakfast causes them happiness. It's trying to recognize they want to be happy, not any further. Don't go any further. Everybody's driven by the thought to be happy. Everybody's driven by the thought not to suffer. It's something very fundamental. You get my point?
Yes, thank you.
That's equanimity. And then as we develop, we're going to then be able to eventually want everyone to be happy, which includes helping them know how to get happiness, which means, having the wisdom to be like it's like your child. You absolutely want your child to be happy, but there they are, an alcoholic. Everybody else can't stand them. They vomit in the soup, they steal, but you have such compassion. And that's the point that comes eventually for every sentient being, that when you can see the person who does the harming, they want to be happy, and out of their own delusion, they believe stealing will cause them happiness. Your child believes drinking will cause their happiness. It's something very primordial. And then we start to have some more wisdom. We will be able to want them to be happy and then have the care to help them be happy, which is what we're trying to get to. You with my point? You with me?
Yes.
Good, darling. Thank you. That's the point. Yeah, exactly. So what else, people? Any questions? So equanimity is just a starting point. It's a basic starting point, that we're all in the same boat. We all want to be happy and we all don't want to suffer. And so the real point in a sense is we're trying to get ourselves out of the equation. That's the point. In other words, strip away, if you've got your friend, your enemy, and your stranger in front of you, 3 people, but let's say you know nothing about them. Let's say you've no idea if one's a saint or a pedophile, and you know nothing about them. It's fairly evident that they're 3 human beings looking at you, 3 human beings. Let's just say you know nothing about them. They're just 3 human beings. There's so much, in fact, they've got so much similarity, it's like a joke. But the way we categorize them makes them like 3 universes, We hate the evil, ugly one. And not only don't want them to be happy, but we wish they'd suffer. We adore the friend and paint all this delicious picture on top of the friend. We paint this ugly picture on top of the enemy. And we paint this boring picture on top of the stranger. So the real point here is more about us removing this attitude that puts these people into these 3 ridiculous categories, That's the thing we're trying to do. Any more questions, people?
I have a question, Venerable. Thank you. Is it our attachment that leads us to think that we can judge these other people and think they deserve happiness? They don't. This one does, this one doesn't. Is that based in attachment?
Of course it is. I mean, when you have attachment is an over-exaggerated like picture of a certain person, for a person, let's say. So, you over-exaggerate their deliciousness and their qualities, and they appear divine to you. We all know that. And so naturally, because our heart is open, because attachment is opening the heart, but then we then, of course, have a big vested interest in wanting them to be happy and fulfilling their wishes, because we know that'll help them fulfill my wishes. So it's this kind of like, I'll scratch your back and you'll scratch mine. That's a major part of an attachment relationship. It's huge in us. So obviously then, deserve is a very big word in this. So as long as you do fulfill my needs and are kind to me and cook my meals and ring me up and tell you love me, which is kindness and good, but my attachment's getting what it wants. So I, of course, believe you deserve my friendship. You deserve me to help you be happy because you make me happy. That's what we mean by deserve. That's what we mean by deserve. Then let's say, you've got an ex-husband. So we would say they don't deserve, because look what they did to me. Even if that ex-husband is being so compassionate to his new wife, so kind, so loving, but you couldn't care less about that because he's not being compassionate and loving to you. So it's just to see the self-centered way we label. These labels are utterly self-centered. I mean, he could be incredibly loving and compassionate to his next wife, but you couldn't care. It's because he's not loving, compassionate to you. So therefore, he doesn't deserve to be happy. So it's sort of really to see the nakedness of the self-centeredness of these qualities. And deserve is totally self-centered. And deserve is the energy of attachment. The way we have the feeling, I deserve happiness. We have this very deep, I mean, this is a really interesting point if we look into the logic of karma. There's no logical basis for that feeling. And therefore, when bad things happen, let's say I punch you in the nose, the feeling is, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. So the deep assumption of attachment, the deep kind of like assumption really is, I deserve only the good things. It's, in other words, it's totally self-centered. It's totally like a little vampire. But it sounds cruel to say that. And deserve is the absolute point. And so that's why we get so pained and upset and hurt when people do bad things to us, because we have this assumption we only deserve the good and we don't deserve the bad. Now, the Buddha would actually say, and we can say this, don't say deserve or don't deserve. You can say you want to be happy and you don't want to suffer. That's a fact. But we extrapolate and say deserve. But deserve has no basis. I often use this concept. If you look in your bank and there's no money in it, your bank account is an important point. You would never say, how dare there be no dollars in my bank? I deserve dollars. Now, what's the logical reason you'd never say that?
Because we know that money doesn't come that way.
No, we know that it's your bank account. And if there's going to be money in there, the onus is on you to put it there. So you do deserve dollars, but you have to put them there. But when we say, how dare there be no dollars in my bank? I deserve dollars. There's an assumption that somebody out there should be doing it. And that's the schizophrenic view of ego. You know, we walk around thinking society should make us happy. Someone out there should make me happy. How come no one makes me happy? I deserve happiness. Like as if it's someone else's job. But it's no one else's job to put money in your bank, but yours. Equally, you look in your garden. How dare there be weeds in my garden? Who put weeds in my garden? I don't deserve weeds. Again, it's completely schizophrenic. If there are weeds in your garden, you put them there. So in that sense, you deserve them. And if there is no dollars in your bank, it's because you deserve no dollars, if you want to use the word deserve at all. So it shows that it is our garden and it's our bank account. And so we take responsibility. But in life, we think it's everybody else's job to make us happy. And we sit there like innocent victims thinking someone else made me, it's their fault, they caused me suffering, and I deserve happiness. And who's going to make me happy? It's totally self-centered. So the deserve is a heavy duty word, and it's the energy of attachment. It's like this petulant child, you know. Do you understand though? Do you understand the point? I mean, we should be embarrassed.
Thank you.
Deserve is a heavy word, and our entire life is based on that, you know. So I want happiness, that's a fact. I don't want suffering, that's a fact. Deserve is a whole different discussion, you know. If you think of karma, your life is your garden. In that sense, whatever is in your life, you do deserve it because you put it there. But not in this heavy duty way, oh, well, you deserve suffering. No. If you realize you're in charge of your life, which is the view of karma, you won't have so much attachment. You won't have so much expectation that someone should make you happy. And then you won't have so much aversion for others also. You see my point? Okay.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Good. All right, darling. So what else, people? I mean, we see that really is the most, off the topic of equanimity, this primordial feeling. We express it like that. It's really totally fascinating. I deserve happiness. We've got to ask why. Because this is my point about the bank account. You can't say, if you do say, I deserve dollars, you see, there's an assumption that someone should put the dollars in your bank, but you know that's not true because it's your bank account. So then, therefore, you wouldn't say I deserve dollars, because if you do deserve dollars, you've got to get them. You have to create the dollars. You've got to create the cause for the dollars. That puts you in a responsible position. And that's the same with this one of karma. When you have that view, you won't have this childish view, I deserve happiness. Why doesn't someone make me happy? How dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. You know that due to karma, you create all the good that happens to you and you create all the bad. So it brings this very powerful feeling of responsibility, and then it enables you to have this more for others. It's quite a powerful concept, actually. What else, people? Any points? So here we don't have to say the pedophile deserves happiness. We don't need to say that. It's the wants happiness. And then when we begin to get more compassion, as I said, we'll then have incredible compassion, because we realize due to their past karma, they've got this powerful addiction, you know, and this is what's making them suffer so terribly. So that becomes the basis of your compassion. Like the mother for her child, everybody can't stand that alcoholic kid, but the mother has such compassion, and this is the point, because she can see that he's harming himself. This is the basis of real compassion as we cultivate more compassion. But we haven't got to that yet. We've only got the first step, which is equanimity. Yes, someone there. Hello, sweetheart. Samir, talk to me.
put my hand down,
Oh,
lower hand.
okay.
Can you hear me okay? Yes.
And
Thank you very much for that. It's a very, I'm sure for many people, I'm finding it raises a lot of questions for me. I guess one way that I'm understanding it is that really, like, if I enlarge it and I think of, let's pick Putin or someone, so they're
Oh.
creating great harm to a vast amount of people who
Yeah.
then in turn are so harmed that then they wish harm
Yes,
towards him and to
right.
all of Russia.
That's right.
And then of course then the wish would be then for him or someone like him to not suffer, because if they realize that in themselves, then they're not going to continue to cause harm to other people.
All this is the consequences of this type of approach, isn't it?
So it's
Right.
it's a trail.
Exactly.
And so when, say, then we look at something else like George Pell and the Catholic Church abusing a whole group of people, or we look at something like an earthquake where, and then we can attach labels and say innocent people have been violated.
Yes, exactly.
What I struggle with, and I do have some, from listening to teachings, understanding of that, karmas are ripened according to different causes in different lifetimes, and it's a purification process. But I find it interesting that in the world that we live in, that the people who are doing the harm often are the ones that are seemingly benefiting in ways that cause such great suffering, often to people who are actually putting the money in their bank, but it's being stolen from them constantly. So it's hard for me to see that all of these things, that all of those groups of people are having their karmas, like we have an environmental karma, I guess, that people are born in a particular place and suffer that. It's really difficult to get my head around it all.
No, I know it is difficult, but the key one with karma, and I'm sure you've heard this, is that there are, if every millisecond we are experiencing, on the one hand, we are experiencing the fruits of millions of karmic seeds day after day after day. Every moment of our experiences is the fruit of a particular seed. And some of them are suffering moments, which means it's due to a negative action. And some are happy moments, which means it's due to a virtuous action. And then at the same time, we see we are doing actions that will produce future experiences. But we can also see, like the person who steals every day, they seem to they explicitly look like they're getting the benefit of stealing by having lots of money in the bank. But which it looks like they're getting happiness from their stealing. But the Buddha's whole point is that, yes, it's like you get the sugar every time you eat the sugar, but it causes long-term diabetes. So in the end, it's like a honey-covered razor blade. It looks like it's bringing immediate pleasure and satisfaction, but it's causing long-term suffering. So to get this view of karma, it's got to have the big picture. It's got to have the long. Got to have the long.
And that's what I'm trying to apply to it.
Yeah,
so if we took that analogy, it's also that if that was me being stolen from or harmed, I have an association with that person in some way, in some
absolutely a very powerful
previous life of having done harm.
This is the point.
Right.
Very strong.
And so how do you deal with that as a person who has had harm done to you?
Where this is why when I mentioned that the compassion wing is more advanced, and why we have to understand karma for ourselves first in order to have compassion for everybody. Because they say the bodhisattvas have more compassion, let's say for Mr. Putin, than the victims, which sounds so shocking to us, because the victims, we are experiencing the fruit of the suffering, and we're finishing that now. But Mr. Putin is just beginning countless lives of future suffering, and that's the only way. And that means, so then So it's a very big picture. And we have to have that big picture. It's a very big one. And the more and so this is why the more we understand we've all got countless lives and all bumped into each other countless times, it's a very different view, you know, and it kind of expands your mind a bit in order to realize we've been from life after life after life, harming each other, helping each other, enemies, countless lives, friend, countless lives, stranger, countless lives. It kind of broadens the whole thing. It gets less tunnel vision. When you realize the person who is harming you now, there's been your beloved 7 lives ago. I mean, it kind of is very sobering, you know. So it brings a very bigger picture, but it takes time, because I mean, the fact of the matter is, if I'm being brutalized at this moment in time in a relationship, this is not, I don't have to hear this. This is more advanced practices. If I'm overwhelmed by some disgusting relationship and I'm completely victimized, I do not need to hear about how this person's been my beloved in a past life. I need to work myself out and get myself the hell out of this ridiculous relationship. So the question where we're at, and that's why I'm talking last week about how it's necessary to think about karma for ourselves first, as get compassion for ourselves first. Then it becomes the basis of being able to have compassion for others. It's a very big picture, you know, isn't it? And meanwhile, it depends on where we're at. So if we have to keep out of the way of some harmers, keep out of the way. You know, it's like your husband of last week beats you up this week. So we've got to keep out of his way. You know, we've had these countless, we've got to be sensible and be realistic, not foolish, you know, and know where we're at and what we can handle. That's the
Can I ask one follow-on question from that?
Yeah.
So in the experience of those ripenings, which for my personal experience, I seem to have extremes of extremely good ripening of karma, and then the complete opposite and everything in between, for whatever reason, because I've created it that way and it's ripening that way. But when there's moments where you do lose that, you know, equanimity or vision, etc., and you find yourself in that, you know, I can't sleep and I'm angry, and you know, that you're right in it. Then is the practice the best thing then when you realize that afterwards and you come out of it and you can go, okay, yes, these things were unjust and they shouldn't happen that way, or you know, there's a reason they did. What's the practice then?
Yes, go on. Practice
is for me, what I do is I go, okay, well, you know, that was a karmic cause, and yes, think about that you don't want to cause more suffering by reacting, and yes, I already have, so be kind to myself.
And you've got to protect yourself. I mean, you've got to protect, like that's why I use that example of those young Tibetan, this is years ago in New York, when Richard Gere invited Dalai Lama, and he invited some young Tibetan nuns, right, discussing their being raped and tortured in prison. So because they have the view of karma, they've got the view of karma since they're born, it would have been really intense, but they were able to work through this experience and bear the suffering and pain, and even eventually have compassion for their torturers. That needs a lot of inner work, you know, come on, my God. So we have to recognize where we're at, have the anger, have the hurt, because it's pretty primordial, and then slowly work through it and take responsibility and move forward. And then just then it becomes a healing process. But also, meanwhile, protect ourselves and don't go anywhere near that wretched person again. Keep distant, be reasonable, you know, we've got to be intelligent about it, self-respectful. It's a hard work, it's pretty intense, it's full on, isn't it?
Yes.
So listen, what's the time? Here we go, 9 o'clock. Okay. So listen, so then I think let's go to the next little step in this 11 techniques. And this next one is hilarious. You need a calculator for this one, but it's sort of the point I've been making already, trying to get us to have this vast picture. The next one is to contemplate, just simply to contemplate the fact, given that there are countless sentient beings, given that we've all bumped into each other countless lives. I mean, that's what Buddha's saying, and it's logical if there are countless beings and we're all beginningless. Then the particular approach here is, as a method to gradually develop this seeing the kindness of others, is to think that all sentient beings have been my mother. And the only reason I use this example is because a mother is considered to be a person who has taken care of you and nurtured you and loved you and sacrificed their life for you. So, okay, and the Dalai Lama always laughs when he hears about Western people who believe that their mother caused them all their suffering. And because we are pretty neurotic in the West, that's fine. And we have got neurotic mums. I mean, join the universe. Why are we so shocked? But we're also shocked that our mother did. We also assume our mother should be a saint. Again, we all assume we deserve a good mother. I don't know why we think it, but we all do, because that's attachment. But the point here is just to use the example of a person who's nurtured us and loved us. Because the point is, the next point, the third one, number 3, there's 2 parts actually, 3A and 3B. And 3A is the mother, to contemplate the mother is kind. Now, this needs very specific thinking. Let's look into this. The mother is kind. First of all, I think right now, when we say a person is kind, it's basically based on attachment. If Mary does everything I want and gives me nice things and smiles at me and looks after me, and of course I'll say she's kind. I don't care if she's as mean as anything to her sister. She can be as mean as she likes to her sister. I don't care, because she's nice to me. And our view of kind is very self-centered. In other words, if someone's nice to me, they must be kind. I mean, this is we're so greedy, you know. And it's really, this is not the point here. This is not the issue. Your mother could well be a really mean person. Don't be surprised. She's a human being, and you happen to have the karma to have your mum, to have her to be your mum, you know. But the fact is, kind here is a more subtle meaning. It means the very fact that someone did anything at all to facilitate your life, in other words. That's the meaning of kind. So your mum, so it's a really good exercise to do, actually, especially if you really can't stand your mum, because she is mean, she is self-centered, she is neurotic. Join the universe, that's fine. And she did harm you, fact. But when you think of this one, because you see, when you realize, when you have attachment for a person, when I was a little girl, of course it was like I was in love with my mother. That means I was attached to her, and she was perfect. And then as you get older, I must have been about 12, and I remember vividly the first time I found fault in my mother, and it was quite a shock. It was a shocking thing to have done. But of course, it was downhill from there. Within a year, she's my worst enemy. And in other words, you've gone from attachment, where you only see everything as divine, and now aversion takes over. You start to find fault, and now all you do is see the faults. We all know this. So it's a very powerful exercise, especially if you haven't forgiven your mother and you don't like your mum, or she annoys you, or she drags you down, whatever it is. It's a really powerful contemplation to do, to simply start to list some of the things that she did that helped your life, like give birth to you. Even if she gave you away, she didn't abort you, honey. She gave birth to you. And if she didn't give you away, she bore you in her womb. And you came out of the womb, and she looked after you, and she put your shoes on, and she wiped your bottom, and she tied your shoe nails, and she looked after you when what do you call the shoe nails? No, laces. Shoelaces, that's right. So little tiny baby things that we know she must have done, but which we have forgotten about because we have aversion for her. And what you're doing is you're painting a new picture, and it's very profound. It works, I tell you. And you start to soften your heart. And if all sentient beings have been your mum, then you do it with everybody, and your heart begins to soften, because these techniques are to help you open your heart to sentient beings. That's the methodology. That's the point of it. So it's very profound. It really works. But you've got to be prepared to do it. Okay, keep away from her. She's neurotic. But we forget, because we have this terrible hubris. How dare she be mean to me? She's my mother. I mean, the number of people who write books about how terrible their mothers were is so shocking in our culture, you know? Like as if we're so shocked. How dare anybody less than a saint give birth to me, you know? Now, the second one is very powerful, 3B. And it goes, every sentient being is kind to me. Now, this is a joke. So we've got to understand the logic. All it means is, and think about this, that from the time of your conception in your mummy's womb up until now, you think about this, there's not a single tiny good thing that has ever happened for you that isn't the handiwork of sentient beings. If you start to, this is like dependent arising, but it's about sentient beings. And it's completely scientific logic. There's, I think of my glasses, these glasses. I cannot see a thing without my glasses. Now, I have no idea who designed these glasses. I've got no idea who, I've got very thick lenses normally, but they've got very special material, so it's very thin. Human beings thought about this. Of course, then we think, well, they did it for their money. What do you mean they're kind? We're not discussing that they're kind in their bones. They could be the pedophile. The designer of my glasses could be a pedophile. That's not the issue here. It's the fact that people work together to get their skills in order for me to have glasses so I can see. This is a fact. Your clothing, my woolen thing, my shirt, the house, the heater, the curtain, everything you look at, the computer, everything that facilitates our life. It's a fact that it's the handiwork of countless sentient beings. The food we eat, that's the handiwork of countless sentient beings, and the death of countless sentient beings. These are scientific facts. So the fact is, we only think about the kind people who make something if it gives you pleasure, but we wouldn't have a single thing. We would have no food, no clothes, nothing if sentient beings didn't do their jobs. So this is a way of when you see the computer and you begin to think of the thousands of human beings involved in this computer. I mean, we don't bother thinking about it because as long as the computer does its job, I'm prepared to thank Mr. Jobs, And then if it doesn't work, I'm prepared to shout at somebody. But the fact is, it's not possible to do anything if I didn't have my jobs, my glasses, my body, my woolen clothes, even your body. What is your body, please? Your mother, and your father, the egg and sperm came together, and then your mother started eating food. Because if she didn't eat food, she would have died and you would have died. So she started eating food. And my mother wasn't a vegetarian, so she ate chickens and she probably ate, pigs, and she ate bulls and all the food. So then what had all happened to that food? It went in, and like a miracle, it began to form Robina's body. And like a miracle, after 7 months, I came out early, a little body came out. What the hell was that body but a mountain of peas, potatoes, fishes, chickens, and bulls? The kindness of sentient beings. Where is my body but for all those animals and all the food I've eaten since then? This is logic. It's using dependent arising and emptiness as a logic, and you can't argue with it. But we take it for granted. We take the food for granted. As long as everyone does my wishes and does it perfectly and gives me the best price, I'm prepared to thank them. So this is a way of opening our mind to realize that we are dependent upon countless sentient beings to even have a life. These are facts. And there's tremendous meditation to do. It's a tremendous analysis to do to open our hearts, So the fourth point is, at this stage of these 4 steps, is a conclusion. I must repay their kindness. I must repay their kindness. And now we start moving into the other techniques of exchanging self for others, It's this gradual kind of process. People spend years in retreats on these points, hugely opening their hearts. And like I said, it's using logic to argue with ego's misconceptions, which are totally self-centered, totally kind of self-centered, That's what we're trying to do in these techniques. So any questions, people? Any questions? Of any kind, about anything? Nothing. You're gonna have to. Come on, questions. I'm running out of voice. Okay, so the next points are these series of techniques that are using, again, logic to get us to start to make this shift in our mind, step by step, from putting me first to gradually putting others first. So these words are easy enough. But again, you know, and this is this discussion like with Samir, you know, one Lama says these techniques, you need to be a suitable vessel. Like I said, if you're in a relationship, complete victim, overwhelmed by misery, no self-respect, someone brutalizes you, harms you, you know, abuses you daily, these techniques are not for you. These are literally more advanced. We've got to understand that, you know. To do these practices, you need to have a very powerful sense of a valid sense of your own worth. And that comes from doing the wisdom wing and the wisdom wing work. You've got to have some self-respect. Right now, as victims, we hate ourselves. We think we're hopeless. That's why we suffer so badly. So to do these practices, especially this next series, where you're learning to make this shift in your mind and learning to put others first, these are profoundly difficult practices, and you've got to be ready to be able to practice them, you know. There's no doubt about that. And that's where these practices called of the 8 verses, which I'm going to discuss next week. This is where this whole approach of exchanging self for others is completely summarized in these 8 verses, you know. So what's interesting here too is in the wisdom wing, all the work about karma and the mind and understanding your delusions, effectively the main cause of suffering is called attachment. This huge I-based emotional hunger, this feeling I'm not enough, I don't have enough, always want something more, that sees the world through the lenses of our needs, therefore loves the friends, doesn't like the enemies, and couldn't care less about the strangers. All this way we live. The main problem is attachment. But the compassion wing, they call it something different. They call it, the term in Tibetan is called self-cherishing. We simply call it selfishness, being self-centered. So attachment is the actual point, is this primordial delusion that you know, that wants what I want. But because of that, you could say, we then cherish me more than others. Now, we don't believe we do. We think we're nothing and nobody, and many people say, I'm able to have compassion for others, but not for myself. So we don't think we cherish me most. It's hard to see that. But the energy of ego is that. I is the central player in our head, isn't it? So in all these techniques, we're trying to get beyond that and begin to see the value, the incredible value in others, not just friends, but all beings. I mean, this is really tremendous stuff and really advanced. I mean, I know when I first heard all these teachings about bodhicitta and everything, it was too shocking for me. I thought, what are they talking about? How is that possible, you know? I mean, for me, the teachings about emptiness are much easier to cope with. Bodhicitta is an outrageous. You hear about people who've got bodhicitta, and it's hard to imagine how they think. It's hard to, you don't believe your eyes when you think about it and see it, you know. It's incredible. It's like really incredible. But it's possible. But you've got to go one step at a time. We've got to nurture ourselves first, take care of ourselves, look after ourselves, lessen our pain and hurt, lessen our attachment, become more self-content, more fulfilled, more joyful. Then we can do these more radical practices of putting others first, you know. We can try a little bit of practice every day. What else, people? I don't want to start on the 8 verses till next week. In a sense of, yeah, what else? I'm running out of voice. I'm so sorry.
I have a question.
Word.
Venerable Robina. Well, it's not so much a question, but what I'm beginning to understand a little better is that this, well, I'm not understanding a whole lot, but this little thing is that I'm beginning to see the difference between loving yourself, respecting yourself, and self-cherishing, that they are very different. They're very different.
Darling, yes.
Okay.
So in other words, being selfish. So if we don't like to think about it ourselves, have a look at a person you know whom we would call selfish. We can see they're always miserable. They always complain about other people, aren't they? They talk about themselves. They feel they're miserable. They're no good. Life is bad. They talk about themselves and they're not very pleasant to be around. You understand? That's cherishing yourself more. It sounds, it's being self-centered. And the point is, we tend to criticize people who are self-centered because they're horrible to be around. But when we really try to understand it in ourselves, it's why we suffer. It's because that's because of suffering, because of attachment. But it's not comfortable, and we don't want to have compassion for that person. We're only prepared to have compassion for a person who gets harmed or something. But self-cherishing or selfishness or self-centeredness is where you're always miserable, criticizing other people. Well, you're thinking about yourself all the time, but it feels really mean to point it out. Because we can't see it this way. We really feel that life is difficult, and bad things do happen, and people do reject us, but we can't see our role in it. It's very hard to see when we're self-centered. It's very hard to see how we cause our own pain. It's very hard because people are being mean to you. Bad things are happening. But this other one of self-respect, which comes from lessening attachment and lessening anger and lessening depression, and that means you're developing more contentment in yourself. You're less neurotic. You're less self-centered. You are more content. This is the point, So having self-respect and, if you like, self-compassion is how you become a nicer, better person. And therefore you are less self-centered, and you do think more of other people because you can see there's less a division between self and other. But when you're really self-centered, and it's really mean, we don't like being accused of being self-centered. It feels very cruel because usually if we are being self-centered, we are very unhappy, and we really believe we're unhappy because no one loves us, or because we got sacked, or because the boyfriend left us, or bad things happen, or I don't have any money and I can't get this, and I get, we see all the bad things and we believe it's all done to us. So we can't see how our own self-centeredness is the source of the pain. It's very hard to see this. All of us.
Yeah.
Understand?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
It feels cruel and mean because bad things do happen. That's the point. But one of the ways self-centeredness works is sort of this feeling, especially if we have the feeling that no one loves me. And it's true, maybe no one is loving you, but we really feel kind of like, why aren't people coming to me? Why aren't people calling me? Why aren't people looking after me? Why aren't people loving me? It's a very real sadness we've got, but we can't see how that's a symptom of self-centeredness. Because we know there are some people who really do think of helping others. I know there's one person I know, and I'm not trying to make her like a saint. She's obviously practiced these things. She's like been very sick recently, but you wouldn't even have known it. Because she's always not trying to be a saint, but thinking of others, helping others, having compassion, and very buoyant and very optimistic, and is able to use her suffering to help her become a better, stronger, wiser person. Whereas if we're self-centered, we can't use any of our suffering. It just drags us down, and we get more and more and more miserable. And it's impossible to see that we are suffering because of our self-centeredness. We think we're suffering because of all the bad things that happen to us. Feels very cruel to say this, but it's really, really true. Do you understand? It's hard to see it. It's very curious. I mean, a person always feels lonely. I'm not being mean. Who's lonely, no one loves me, there's no one out there, I don't have a partner. You like that, you really feel like, why isn't someone loving me? I deserve love. Why isn't someone love me? I'm so lonely. I'm sad. I've got no friends. No one helps me. But some people who are out there helping others, they're not thinking that way because they're the ones doing the work. And it never occurs to us, well, if I can help others, it could help me. It seems kind of like mean to point it out like that. It's very hard to see when we're being self-centered, that's the source of our pain. It's very interesting, this. It's hard to see it. Because I is the main player in our head, you know. It's been a lot of courage to look at this. And indeed, the irony is to be kind to ourselves, meaning to see that this is why I'm suffering and try and heal it, you know. It's very interesting. Yes, Mary.
Venerable, there's a question in chat. Hillary, would you like me to read that or would you like to unmute?
Thank you, Mary. I can read it.
Good, Hillary.
Thank you. Thank you, Venerable. So our culture, the human mind, we elevate romantic love as something special or magical. And I'm just wondering, like, according to the Dharma, is romantic love just another form of attachment, or is it special somehow?
I understand. Yeah, I understand.
Thank you.
Well, clearly we're social beings, aren't we? We're social beings. We get born from a mother. We need a father for it, usually the sperm, you know, that kind of thing. We live around sentient beings, you know, we're very social. So clearly, if we look at the karmic evolution of us, karma's like personal evolution, you know, now we're a bit more flexible with who we have sex with, but you know, like we're karmically kind of created. And that we do it. No one makes us this way. We create ourselves. And it's the creator of this is attachment. So attachment over eons of time are what create the eyes, the ears, the penis, the vagina, the holes that need feeding, you know, what these 5 senses that need feeding. And so one of the major attachments we can see, we call it romantic love, which usually relates to sexual contact. And so all sexual contact is, or the pleasure that's triggered from sexual contact, happens to be one of the nicest pleasures. I mean, I think in general, that's what people say. You have to eat, you know, the same pleasure eating a piece of cake is just not the same, you know. So some people have pleasure doing other things, whatever. But in general, the pleasure, the happiness that is triggered from contact, you know, contact with an object of desire, an object of attachment, is pretty intense attachment. So naturally, culturally, and over the centuries, we've created this, and we've created this culture, and our whole culture is based upon, you know, 2 people coming together, falling in love, so-called romantic attachment, in other words, and then, you know, often having babies and houses, and our structures, our structure is based on this. But it's all completely rooted in attachment. Of course it is. Of course it is. What else is it? It's the evolution of attachment. So that doesn't mean that we can't add love and compassion and kindness to the mix, which is what some people manage to do, and have reasonable relationships and bring up children, or don't bring up children, but do good things and be kind to the world on the basis of having a particularly close relationship. So we can see we can make the best of it and add love and compassion to the mix and be useful in life. I mean, but of course it's attachment. What else is it? Do you understand, Hillary? It's literally the product of attachment over eons and eons of lifetimes, is Buddhism. It's like evolution, you know?
Sure. Yeah. It's, you know, like in our culture, it's sort of like the thing to strive for is to find your mate and find your partner.
Exactly.
And so if you don't ever, you know, get together with someone, that doesn't mean that you've, like, well, I mean, I guess you answered my question.
Yeah, I mean, the point is the suffering only happens if you don't get a partner, when you yearn for a partner. You don't suffer if you don't yearn. I didn't yearn for a partner. I was glad to give them up. So you give me a partner, it's like putting me in prison. Make me live in the same house, in the same bed as another person. That's the best way to give me the work. I'd rather go to prison, solitary confinement, than to do that. So thank you. I don't want a partner. So the only reason we would suffer if we didn't have one is because attachment is yearning for one and defining yourself in terms of having one. That's the only reason we would ever suffer in relation to that.
Sure.
But I mean, more and more these days, I think it's acceptable to be on your own and whatever, you know, it's not really the same as it used to be once. You understand? Especially for
I do.
Yeah. And I mean, the point is, many people, I mean, Yes, and in that sense, within the world as it is, to have a relationship is a marvelous thing if it's added compassion and love to the mix. If it's only attachment, then you're only going to have misery. So
Yeah.
if you want a happy life, whether it's with one partner or none, you've got to develop love and compassion. I mean, that's the end, really. And in a sense, you could say, yeah, so some people don't want the relationship, but are able to become very fulfilled, happy, content people. And more these days, people would accept that possibility, whereas once it would have been totally weird, you know?
Sure.
Do you understand?
I do. Thank you. Thank you
Good.
very much.
Oh, time to go home, I think. I've run out of voice. I'm going to cheat you of 5 minutes. All right, people. So I think enough. And now we've done a little bit of the first few techniques, equanimity being the main one. So next week we'll go into more. We'll use the 8 verses as an explanation of this outrageous level of exchanging self for others, making this paradigm shift in the mind, where finally that culminates in this attitude of bodhicitta, where literally for that person, once they've got it, others would be only the ones you think of. I mean, that's called mental illness in our culture, but it's called bodhicitta in the Buddhist culture, or called a saint in Christian culture, you know. So we'll go into those techniques next week. All right, people. Thank you, darlings. Food for thought. Keep moving, keep listening, keep checking. And so may all these seeds we planted, this 90 minutes gone like a dream, or 85 minutes, may these seeds we planted not go astray, but maybe nourish them with our work, with our practice, with our effort. And may they ripen as our Buddhahood, no matter how long it takes. So we really can be a benefit to others. And may compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. And may His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche and our own special lamas, may they all live long, 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 long lives so they can be of benefit to the world. And may we live long lives so we can keep practicing. That's it. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
John.
Venerable Robina.
Thank you, Venerable.
Really
Thank
excellent,
you.
darling.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful day, everyone.